So we're having a strange time. There are people from political parties who are resigning and then moving to other political parties. There are people from political parties resigning and starting their own political spaces. There are people in business or in other careers starting their own political parties, all ahead of the 2024 election. All of them, by and large, have one thing in common: a deep sense of disgruntlement with where we are as a country, and just the state of service delivery, or the absolute absence of that in large degrees, and therefore, that disgruntlement playing out. What's that famous South African word, like "gatvol," like what do you do next? Okay, so in that with that in mind, I certainly have been keeping an eye on all things that all people are doing. It's so aligned to what I do at Champion South Africa. The eye then has focused on the work of the Groundwork Collective. So let's find out what they're all about. And I made the point about people from political parties now working in their own spaces. This is another example. Mbali Ntuli is with us. She's once at the DA, of course, but now heading up the Groundwork Collective. Mbali, I appreciate your time. Good morning.
Good morning, Ashraf, and salam alaikum to your listeners, and happy Ramadan.
Yeah, walaikum salam. Thank you. Nice and a day of peace for you and I, and for everybody else in the remaining 2 days of Ramadan, and then it's of course Eid, and then it's another world thereafter, right? So talking about another world, I mean, this for you, the Groundwork Collective, is another world when you compare that to where you were in the political spaces, right?
It is in the sense that it's definitely not a political party, and I was very clear when I left a year ago that I would not be joining one, I would not be starting one, but I would be going back into communities and working on the ground to make sure that I could give back to South Africa. And so it's different in that sense, but I mean, because everything in South Africa is still incredibly political, and the work that so many of us have to do is partly to uphold the democracy that we start to see faltering. In that sense, it's the same sort of work.
So tell me more about the Groundwork Collective. I mean, what's the plan?
So the Groundwork Collective is a non-profit organization. We have 3 pillars: food production, skills and entrepreneurship, and civic education. And these came about because when I was in politics for a very long time, one of the things that I realized, particularly in the constituencies that I would work with, was that not only were people food insecure, but they were starving. And even if we were desensitized to the fact that adults had no food, it is a moral and policy scandal that we have allowed for the fact that children in our country are starving, are malnourished, are having childhood stunting, and by the time they get to school, are already having their lives pretty much determined for them because they haven't had the nutrition to be able to learn and to have normal childhood and adulthood, which then becomes a problem for the state. And so we wanted to team up and work with people that can teach people skills to have their own home-based gardens. We are planting gardens in schools and in creches because, again, particularly where I come from in KZN, there's been a complete collapse of things like the National School Feeding Scheme. And instead of hoping that government is going to do the right thing where we see grand-scale corruption all the time, we actually have circumvented that and gone straight to the source and said to schools, to creches, if they give us some land and allow us to come in, this is what we're going to do. And so it's been really great to see a lot of that work happening. And then in terms of skills and entrepreneurship, we want to be the kind of organization that is connecting young people who may not have experience, or may not have jobs, and we know this is a big issue in South Africa, to the people that we have as part of our patrons, as part of our mentors, to give them that connection. And this is me using my privilege of being in politics for 2 decades to give back, because I do have people who have resources. I do have people who are incredibly well connected and can help young people. And so I also want to make sure that they are not just sitting around at home waiting from the age of 18 until 65 when they collect their pension, not having had any stable job or any kind of form of income. And then the last one, which is incredibly important, especially ahead of the next elections, is our pillar on civic education. We are going to be registering hundreds of thousands of young people, but not just registering them to vote, making sure that they also have the civic education portion of it. Because in our country, a lot of people have voter education, which is how to put an egg in an election, but they don't have the civic education portion, which tells you how does the government work, how do different political structures work, how can you, as an ordinary person, hold a political party accountable? What are the different legislations that you can utilize to make sure that you are actually living the best kind of life as an individual in South Africa? Do you know when your council sits, when the legislature sits, do you know that you're allowed to go? Do you know that there are standing committees like the PPP where anybody can actually go and appear before them and get them to help resolve certain issues as long as they're not subjudicate? And I realized a very long time ago in politics that the problem we have is not that people don't know that they should vote, it's that they don't see how their vote makes any kind of difference. And they're never going to unless you give them civic education and empower them to be able to use something. So I'm to make sure that I can fill in that gap so that people have political efficacy, because once you have that, you ensure that people actually opt into the system and want to come out and vote and want to turn out, which is a huge problem for us. And
yeah. So carry on, Mbali. Go ahead. Yeah.
well, I was saying it's a huge problem for us in South Africa because no one's talking about the fact that our voters' roll is aging, immigrating, or dying. And the more and more we don't have young people particularly turn out to vote and get into the habit of not voting, the more we weaken our democracy. And so even in the last elections, you know, you'll say that a party got 51%, but if only less than half the population came out to vote, is that really a legitimate electoral outcome? So we're interested in making sure that not only do we get more people to come out so that we can actually hold the political parties to account and scare them of being afraid of who these new cohorts of voters are who have no historic allegiance, but after the election, we must make and do the work of actually holding them to account. And we want to show people how to do that.
So it's interesting. I mean, just in the last couple of days, I had a chat with Musi Maimane, would have been your leader when you were still at the DA, and then just yesterday, of course, Zongezo Zibi just launching the Rise Mzansi party, and effectively, I mean, Musi is suggesting that the largest party is the non-voting party, and he sort of threw a figure like 70% of the eligible voters don't vote at all. Yesterday, Zongezo at the launch again emphasizing the fact that they have to get more people to vote. They're just complete absence of voters, and others are saying the same thing, which gets me thinking. Like, it's not like democracy started last week. In fact, we're 29 years into it, and the anniversary comes up on the 27th of April, right? Like, whose responsibility has it been in the 3 decades so that we could avoid the conversation you and I are having? I find it either bizarre. I know the need. I concur with your need and my need, but like, it's bizarre that we're still having this conversation where people are switched off from voting.
We have all collectively dropped the ball on this particular issue. 29 years into democracy, we should have had civics as a huge part of our curriculum, I would argue. And I think that there was an over-reliance on thinking that the IEC would step in to do that work. But the IEC is voter education, they're not civic education. And given how much they get gutted every single year in terms of their annual budget, I don't think they have the money to do both kinds of things. And certainly political parties are not going to do it because they know for them what they need to do is rely on differential turnout, which means that what political parties do is they figure out, okay, we need 10 people to vote for us. We're going to register those 10 people, keep their details, and get them to go out and vote. They won't do anyone else who is not going to vote for them because then strategically it's a waste of their time. And
you say all political parties do that? I mean, as a policy, I mean, you can draw on your own experience. Is that what they do? Because that suggests that there's a lack of interest for what's right for South Africa, isn't it?
So I think that they justify it to themselves by saying that strategically it's what actually helps them get the turnout for what they need for election day. And it's done all over the world. The problem that we have in South Africa is that we haven't coupled that with the kind of civic education that then allows for people to do something afterwards. In South Africa, if you want to get your counsellor to actually help you, you have to hope that they can. And if they don't, you can't fire them. You can hold them to account. You either wait for them to die or have a big enough scandal in the political party that the political party pulls them out. So there's no accountability clause that we put into our voter education or civics that actually helps us as citizens be able to do anything about it.
So that last point I think is particularly important. If you're saying there's no accountability and there's no direct MP, I mean, it's something that I've heard over and over in recent weeks, right? How then will you convince someone who's not voting, who throws that back at you to say, but you know what? even when I vote in an MP into Parliament, right, as opposed to at a ward level, they don't respond to me. They don't report back to us. They report once I vote them in. They respond and responsible to the party that they stand for. So why should I vote? So how do you respond? What would you tell that person? Because I think many may say exactly the same thing.
Exactly. So, and this is why we want to do the work. There are ways to actually get them to do it. And there's ways that you can actually trigger, even through the speaker of councils or legislatures, to have specific MPs or councillors who are allocated towards, to force them to actually give report back meetings to the constituencies and to the communities that they serve. But nobody does it because I don't think South Africans know. I think unless you've actually been somebody who's intimately involved with politics at that level, they don't even know that that's something that they can do. I do it all the time. I've organized my community into having a UIP, which is an urban improvement precinct. We now are flying by being able to collect rates that come to us as the community to do the work that the municipality can't. But again, these are not things that I think the ordinary South African knows. And I don't blame them because they obviously are overwhelmed with everything that's happening in the country. But the mechanisms exist, but you have to show people so they know how to do it for themselves. And I think once you show people, and I have proven this by doing it where I've been a constituency head, then people buy into the system because then they know that they can get things back.
Mm-hmm. How if someone says, and I'm like, you know, you and I hear this often, right? To say, why should I vote? Because my vote doesn't really matter. So that's the one scenario. And the other person who says, actually, my non-vote really counts because my non-vote is an important record that says we are literally totally disillusioned with the political options we have, right? So what would you tell that sort of person?
The non-vote doesn't count for anything, unfortunately, in the way that we allocate proportional seats in this country. And so if you would be somebody who was frustrated, rather go and spoil your vote and register in that way. But if you don't vote at all, that isn't taken into account anyway. And people have to think of it like this. If if a political party gets 10 out of 15 votes and you decide that you're not going to vote, and then it becomes 10 out of 14, what you're actually doing is making the denominator number smaller so that a political party that's done no extra work, hasn't gone out to do anything to actually help the community, is still able to have a huge majority by the fact that you've allowed them to have a smaller pool of people that they have to um, appeal to. And if they know that they can get their 10 voters out every single time because they've registered them and they can get them out for voting day, they don't have to worry about people that don't vote. It's actually a great thing for them if you don't come out to vote because it makes the
Mm-hmm.
overall number much smaller for them. What we want to
Yeah.
do, and this is why the registration projects are so important, is flood the voters roll so that it doesn't become 10 out of 15, it becomes 10 out of 20. Because then that political party has to wonder how it's going to get the 10 other people and actually work actively to try and get them to come out and vote for them by appealing to them, by listening to them, and by actually doing the kind of work that is going to get those people to vote for them. And so
And
you help democracy by forcing political parties to work.
just the last thing on voting, and then we'll move on. I mean, I would think as part of your, you know, let's call it voter education or advocacy, right? At some stage, for all the reasons you've already mentioned above the importance to vote, um, those non-voters will say, okay, what are the voting options? And I mean, do you find inadvertently you're going to have to talk up the fact that the options we have in the current political space are viable options, although the reality does suggest otherwise?
So, I mean, obviously, my work is nonpartisan, so I won't be delving deeply into that particular, um, conversation with people. But what I can say is this: the more of us who vote not only helps to strengthen democracy, but by forcing current political parties to do their work. What importantly it does is create a cohort of people that new political parties, people who might have better platforms, might have better ideas, to be able to have a pool of people that they can tap into. And so what's great about that is that even if it means for us in South Africa, because we are a relatively new democracy, even if it means that we have to support single issue parties or parties that are 2%, 5%, that is much rather what we would have than to continue to give our votes to the parties that currently exist if they aren't serving us. And so you
Mm,
want to send a message that we will give our votes to people that are trying out new things. And we would rather do that over and over again until we have the right formula and the right party that grows into something that's really great for South Africa than to continue with what is the status quo. Because if we don't do that, what we're saying is that we're happy with what we have. And I don't think any of us are, and to not suggest that we aren't. And so I don't mind if we have new political parties that come out and say that they want to, raise their hands. I think that we should incredibly encourage them because we want to have as many options available to us as the South African voting public.
Okay, so this is a non-party political question. Ultimately, would you say that the work of the groundwork collective, particularly at community level, and I mean outside the voting, because you mentioned a whole lot of things that you'd want to do about empowering them, right, and making people far more empowered and have agency, right? I mean, is that not the work of government? Is that not an indictment on just how dependent government has become on community groupings, NPOs, NGOs, whether it's the Groundwork Collective today, whether it's relief organizations, whether it's Give to the Givers? Effectively, each one of these groupings, and including yours now, are doing very basic work. Effectively, it's not rocket science, but doing the work of government, who's not governing effectively in uplifting communities.
100%. I think that we're beyond the idea of seeing that the total collapse of our service delivery has burdened, I think, citizens to having to do things on their own. And thank goodness for us in South Africa that we have had such a strong civil society basis that is upholding democracy in many of the communities. And I'm not just talking about, big organizations like Gift of the Givers or what will become a Brown Collective. I'm talking about the people that are the average person who's working in their community, the Mama Jackie who takes care of the HIV orphans, the auntie that starts a feeding scheme that allows people to come and eat every single day because there's no other food. Those people are the reason that our democracy has not collapsed, because if we lost them, communities would turn on each other and would turn on our government. And so I think that government should be doing far more to actually help civil society. But in the absence of them doing that, at least in South Africa, we have them. And that's what actually is keeping our democracy alive.
Let's just wrap up by asking you this, right? Yes, there may be a difference between rural communities and suburban communities, but by and large, in terms of your research in establishing the Groundwork Collective, what do you think is the one single most important issue lacking in building champion communities? And I say champion communities because that's why I fit in the Champion South Africa. What's the one thing that's glaringly lacking that requires your most urgent attention?
Jobs. If you don't give people the opportunity to have a life of dignity where they can decide for themselves what they want to do with their lives and give them the ability to have that kind of economic freedom, you have killed that person and destined them to a life of deprivation. And so for us, it's been a big thing that we've been working with. And even if you can't give a person a job at that time, skills so that they can go out and look for something. If we don't get that right, very soon our democracy in our country is going to turn on itself. So that is a huge portion of what we're doing. Obviously, I've been speaking about civic education because we're going towards an election and we've just had a bill signed by the president. But that's the big work that we've been doing. And we've already started with a lot of that work and a lot of the food production work as well. Because the other thing is 8 out of 10 young people in South Africa have to make the choice between buying food or using their money to go seek a job. And so we also want to take that equation out. I'm not going to live in a country where people are starving.
Well, there you are. And just the last part about the jobs and personal economic growth. I mean, what's the quick? Because I mean, there has to be a long haul story, but there has to be a quick fix as well, right? What's the quick fix to that?
Look, I don't know if there is a quick fix, and certainly our government has not been able to do anything. But certainly from the groundwork perspective, we want to just at least give people the skills and then link them up with people who can give them the opportunities. Even if it's contract work, it's something. And so for us, the quick fix is quickly upskilling people and quickly connecting them to the various people from philanthropy, the arts, business, academia, who said they'll come on board and volunteer their time.
And my final thought to you is, I think politicians talk and they talk in parliament, as you know that, and they talk and they sometimes overtalk. But it's about time that people at community level who are hell bent on restoring communities start talking a lot more to each other. So I would think that Groundwork Collective should be having a lot more conversation with other organizations, including myself, and let's see what happens, because we need to take away the power away from what we think it is to where it really is, which is with the people at community level. Thank you so much for your time. Just by the way, Mbali, website, social media, posted pages that you can encourage us to check out.
Yes, so it's groundcollective.org, and we are on all social media platforms, and we do have a website, so people can get in touch with us there. And even if people who are patriotic South Africans want to volunteer their own time and become part of our group of people that help other people, we'd love that.
Okay, groundworkcollective.org. That's the website you need to remember. Appreciate your time. Fascinating talking to you in Ntuli, throwing insights into what can happen at community level. Appreciate your time there in Mbali and Ntuli. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There we are. Lots more to talk about, including the consumer price index going up again. And then in our history, or rather mosques from around the world, we talk about the world-renowned Hagia Sophia Grand Mosque and the backstory around that right after this.